Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And tonight's presentation is brought to you by the Fallbrook Climate Action Team. And we have a website, fallbrookclimateactionteam.org. Check it out if you haven't been on there. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a nonpartisan group of volunteers concerned about climate change. And we bring you various topics on the last Tuesday of each month. However, next month in December, we will be dark because of the holidays and everything. So we're taking a break for December. We will be back in business on Tuesday, January 25th, when we will have a presentation about drought and dead water storage. So enjoy the holidays, everyone, and then come back in January. And of course, we'll send out an email blast ahead of time. So with that, tonight, our guest speaker, we thank you for coming on. We know you have back-to-back meetings. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I might toss it to you to pronounce, but it's Dr. Murtaza Baksamusa.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay, good. And he is the program manager for regional sustainability and climate action for the county of San Diego. And so Dr. Baksamusa is going to share with us tonight the county's decarbonization framework for reducing gases in the atmosphere. So we're really excited to actually have the county leading and doing something about this. So with that, Dr. Baksamusa, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for the introduction. I too am excited about the county leading it. I'm new to the county, like 6 months, and it's a new experience. Before I begin, I wanted to ask if Joy or somebody can play my presentation, or should I share my screen?
We could do it.
Okay, Tom.
We have it here.
Okay.
It's going to be a little different. I had to put it in PowerPoint because the PDF wasn't very visible for the whole screen.
Okay.
Hopefully we maintain the integrity.
No problem. I can get started. So the context here is with the new board earlier this year, they directed the county staff to create a regional decarbonization framework. This framework was intended to inform policymaking at a regional, county, and city government levels to reduce greenhouse gas emissions collectively. It is separate from but complements ongoing climate action planning efforts by local governments, as well as regional planning in energy, transportation, and land use. So this effort, it was directed in January. We entered into a contract with UC San Diego in July and have a draft out in October. The next slide. This is the team that we have working on this. This study, the draft study, is the first step in positioning the region as a global leader in climate planning. It is authored by the team led by the University of California, San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy, and working in collaboration with the Energy Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego School of Law, and other consultants with technical expertise in energy, transportation, and building systems. Now, this work is not in siloed. It should be noted that the transportation consultant Fair and Peers is also working on the county's vehicle miles traveled analysis and the climate action plan. And they're also working certain components of SANDAG's plan. Next, these are the key steps in developing the framework. The modeling of the data provided science-based pathways that form the basis of the policy recommendations. Actual decarbonization results will come from the framework's adoption and implementation of policies enacted by various jurisdictions. Now, I should pause here and kind of like give a little bit of context. This is not about a legal mandate. This is not about authority, but this is about our collective action and responsibility in terms of what our regional emissions are, and whether or not any of these emissions have to be accounted for through any of the protocols that are used for climate action plans. We want to account for, take responsibility, mitigate, and be accountable to that mitigation. So we want to be able to present a framework that can be enumerated and tracked over time. So that is kind of like how it is a little bit different and from any other kind of regulatory framework. It's kind of unique in nature. Massachusetts has done a statewide analysis of this kind, but it is not being done at a regional scale before. Next, here's the timeline for the development of the framework. As I mentioned, we started working on in July. In August, we had about 60 local organizations in the areas of transportation, land use, buildings and industries, and energy invited to 6 focus groups. They included public agencies, business, labor, environmental, and community organizations. In September, we held a virtual public workshop. You can see the presentation online by Elena Creed from the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I should also mention that Elena Creed is going to author a chapter in our framework. It is yet to be complete. There's just a placeholder there that presents San Diego as a case study with positives and what opportunities and lessons learned in this process of how do we work as a region. It was followed by public comments, a very live audience with the virtual chat that covered a vast array of topics, including renewable energy and union labor. Our public notices for the workshop were translated into 6 threshold languages, and translation was provided in English and Spanish. The draft technical report of the framework was released in October. The comments for that are due by Friday, but nonetheless, the work will continue and through roughly March, where we expect that work to be completed from UC San Diego. We will also continue to work on the workforce development study and an implementation pathways report, because a report in its own without a legal mandate is not going to produce the results on actual emissions reductions. Its implementation will be. So therefore, we will transition over to actually producing an implementation pathways report in early 2022. So when we go to the board in August, we will have all 3 components: the implementation pathways, the technical analysis from UC San Diego, as well as the workforce development report. Next slide. This is the technical working group as reviewing it. It includes different agencies such as regional agencies such as SANDAG, Port, Airport, APCD, as well as Cal EPA. Other private and nonprofit experts include those from business, labor, industry, and environment. Next. The draft that we have is an initial step towards a regional dialogue. The framework is based on emerging best practices from across the nation and globally in the areas of jobs, buildings, land use, infrastructure, and energy. The scale and pace of this effort, and I want to kind of give an example. For example, energy is not siloed based upon jurisdiction between what's within the county or the city's authority. These are regional decisions that we will have to make, not just in, for example, production, but also transmission lines or procurement for partnerships with, say, Imperial County, including policymakers across the region that have the authority to implement this framework. We will therefore organize sub-regional convenings to begin the journey, even after UC San Diego has reached the milestone of completing the technical report. After this slide, it is, I see a question, what are the boundaries for our region? We are using the San Diego County small c as the region boundary. And I want to mention, like I often kind of need to preface that by saying we are blessed as a region in terms of San Diego because, and we have an advantage over any other region for two reasons: political and geographical. Geographically, we're kind of contained from the west, the ocean, the east desert, the north, we're hitting LA, and south, we're the border. So between that, we can, the methodological issues are easier to deal with in terms of defining a specific boundaries for the region. But more importantly, politically, we are also a unified region in the sense that, for example, LA, it's difficult to define the region with so many counties. If you look at Bay Area, the same issue, there are multiple regional agencies as well as counties. So there isn't really a region that can politically be self-contained in those areas. So San Diego is advantageous in that sense that we can actually have an elected body such as the County Board of Supervisors, where every resident of this region has a representative on that body. So that is kind of unique for San Diego. All right, I'll keep moving. I got distracted on region. All right, the next slide, the next few slides, where this is an excerpt from the presentation that Professor Gordon McCord gave at the November 17th hearing at the board. So the full presentation, you can view it on our website. I'd suggest you do because it has a lot of the key findings from every chapter. So I won't go into all the key findings. All I'll do is here is present what the methodology was. And also I want to kind of give a disclaimer that there were 26 authors involved in writing this framework. I was not an author, so I don't know the technical aspects of it. But nonetheless, the coordination between the different authors in different disciplines was very enlightening. And I really think that in the end, we want to tackle the climate crisis, something that's big in scale of this kind. We need to have intersectoral expertise and coordination. All right, next slide. So the study approach, once again, these are UC San Diego slides. The intent here is to provide a technical pathway to decarbonization. And it begins with a national or a state model of deep decarbonization to guide San Diego regional modeling to ensure that San Diego regional pathway is coherent with statewide pathways for achieving these goals. And as I mentioned, energy systems are so jurisdictions need to move in lockstep. And we want to make sure we're consistent and actually implementing the Paris Agreement. Next. This is just an example of the energy modeling charts in the chapter in terms of how they downscaled from a state level down to regional level, drawing up the boundaries of San Diego County, the physical geography of San Diego County. Next. The experts that were utilized had the following areas of expertise: renewable energy production, transportation, natural climate solutions, buildings, and employment impact. It's important to emphasize that this framework does not identify right pathway, instead shows multiple pathways that can highlight trade-offs, decision points, risks, and energy and synergies. Next. The unique characteristic of this kind of analysis is to provide specific quantitative pathways to decarbonization with the trade-offs, acknowledging the trade-offs. Oftentimes what happens is that policy happens in a vacuum without actual results or performance in mind as to what that policy will actually make a difference or not. In this case, what we're trying to do is from the performance quantitative pathways, we want to arrive at the policies that can best accomplish those. And oftentimes the policy pathways could take multiple paths. So it's not just a single path. They try to include scenarios such as things that may be important to certain stakeholders, such as preserving ecosystems, biodiversity. How do we protect utilize urban land in a most efficient manner, such as for renewable energy, solar panel siting? How do we protect agricultural land? And particularly a very interesting, one of its kind analysis of vegetation, different types of vegetation and its value as a carbon sink. I thought that was quite fascinating, and they arrive at a very interesting conclusion that we should not be changing land use. It's the best way to keep carbon in the ground. Next slide. Focus on proved, next slide. The focus on proved scalable technologies. It's okay, Tom, I can.
It's stuck.
Okay, so sometimes we have, and it's a good thing that, we often presented with good, innovative, new ideas that need to be explored. And the CEC, the federal government, they're investing in different types of pilot technologies, demonstration projects. This particular, yes, that one. So this particular NAS focuses on proved scalable technologies. So if there are new pilot and new technologies that will come online in the future, then they will supplement the renewable energy share. At the same time, the report highlights uncertainties and emphasizes the need for a planning process that addresses those uncertainties. In all these cases, it is useful to have a decision-making system that ranks sites, policies, investments, and can be updated over time. So we can track the impacts of our decisions over time. This next slide uses the phrase low regret policies. It's kind of interesting to term because it captures some changes that will happen anyways. And the question then is, how do we, or should we try to take advantage of these particular policies? Should we accelerate them, adopt them earlier on through regulatory approaches? These are near-term actions that are common across all pathways, and they play out no matter which scenario you pick. And one example of such a thing is replacing end-of-life heating capital stock with electrified alternatives. When a natural gas appliance has come to end of life, there's no reason why it should be replaced with a GHG emitting appliance. So that kind of is something that in some ways the market is going to drive it, consumer preferences, shareholder value. In the end, companies, corporations are themselves going to do it, whether or not the government mandates it. These are going to happen no matter what. So we got to look at some of these and see what is the interaction between regulation and market. Like the next few slides So this is where the UC San Diego presentation, the rest of it, I would highly recommend you look at it online with key findings from each chapter. The following slides are considerations and board direction that we received whilst we were preparing the framework. There was considerable board interest. The board heard this and discussed this at multiple hearings, and will continue to do that. They'll continue to provide further direction in the future. 3 of them are regional equity, workforce development, and alternative renewable energy resources. So let me do the next one. This is about regional equity. In July, the board directed staff to use regional equity and environmental indicators to assess the impacts of climate change on underserved communities and to plan for how we'd weather the changes to ensure resiliency. Equity considerations were factored into the draft technical framework in the sectors of energy, buildings, and land use, and will be included in USD's analysis of climate action policies in the San Diego region. So first, our renewable energy consultants ran specific scenarios that prioritizes rooftop solar and urban infill solar in communities where economic development, good paying local jobs, potential air quality benefit, and reducing emissions from thermal plants would have high societal value. They found the scenario would result between 5 and 30% reduction in infrastructure development on previously undisturbed land, namely greenfield development. If coupled with apprenticeship programs, job training opportunities could be significant. Second, the chapter on decarbonization of buildings pays careful attention to impacts on low-income residents and those living in apartments. Third, our land use consultants found that by expanding tree cover, we can reach negative emissions. The numerous co-benefits of increased urban canopy cover and urban tree distribution include furthering regional equity goals and improving societal welfare through better air and water quality, cooling effects, and aesthetic improvements. Because oftentimes EJ issues and environmental air quality issues work on parallel track or different than climate issues, which focus more on carbon dioxide alone. So our land use consultants wove in these different co-benefits together and try to materially assess the benefits of these co-benefits. Fourth, as part of analyzing the policy opportunities, USD is assessing all climate action plans across the region to ensure the policies are socially equitable. So as a group, they're going to look at all the different measures and commitments across all cities in the county. They will then consider the equity implications of these local policies and potential for regional collaboration. As an example, what equity implications result from widespread electrification of buildings and transportation, and could regional programs be developed to address these impacts? The implementation of these equity-based policy measures will be done in collaboration with the county's newly established Office of Environmental and Climate Justice. Next slide. Whilst we're changing slides, this new office, I'm also helping staff that. If you have questions, need to get more information, please let me know. I'll probably put possible the URL out there. It's sdcounty.ca.gov/OECJ. I'll carry on. The board also directed staff, the prior slide. The board also directed staff to prepare a comprehensive green jobs plan that addresses the opportunities available from climate investments, as well as career pathways for our workforce directly impacted by decarbonizing our economy. We have since entered into a contract with Inclusive Economics to develop a comprehensive and coordinated regional strategy for the county to address workforce needs. The report will be jointly authored by Dr. Carol Zabin and Bethany Jones and modeled after the state of California's Jobs and Climate Action Plan that provides recommendations on how to support a region's workforce as it transitions to a climate neutral, carbon neutral economy. Next. Just last month, the board had directed staff to research the feasibility of alternate forms of renewable energy other than solar and onshore wind, and to include any findings in future updates. In this few slides here, I'll touch on geothermal, offshore wind, and ocean wave energy. Next. So UC San Diego's modeling in the draft framework focused on proven large-scale technologies. Although San Diego does not have a known geothermal resource area, Imperial County's Salton Sea, due to its location on top of San Andreas Fault, produces the second highest geothermal electricity in the state. The picture on the right is a geothermal site known as Hell's Kitchen, which will be operational in 2024. The map on the left shows 5 sites in Imperial County identified in the framework. So this was just the low-hanging fruit. There's a lot more potential, but our framework found 5 that can supply 10,000 gigawatt hours of geothermal energy to the San Diego region. So they extrapolated how much of it could be transported through transmission to San Diego by 2030, and how it would have a potential to create 1,900 jobs over a 10-year period. Just to give context, 10,000 gigawatt hours is half of our entire region's energy consumption, and about a fifth of what energy we would need in 2050. However, transmission lines would be needed in order to get the power here. Next. With geothermal, the brine found underneath the Salton Sea also contains lithium, which could make geothermal power more financially feasible in the future. But there are important environmental considerations. Lithium is a key ingredient used in batteries for electric cars and energy storage. By some estimates, it could supply 40% of the global demand for lithium. The state legislature created a Lithium Valley Commission that's preparing a report on the potential exploration of lithium around the sea by October 2022. On the right is a picture of a lithium extraction demonstration plant in Calipatria, California. Some of the environmental considerations are related to the life cycle of lithium, such as evaporation ponds releasing lithium into the atmosphere, ecosystem damage, and the lack of recycling of lithium batteries. According to US Department of Energy, lithium-ion batteries are collected and recycled at a rate that is less than 5%. Next slide. Offshore wind is at a cusp of moving from planning and exploration to leasing and development in California. The president has set a goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. Among the challenges to offshore wind are transmission of energy and competing coastal uses, such as shipping, fishing, recreation, marine conservation, and competing coastal uses, including the Department of Defense activities. An advantage of offshore wind is that it has a high capacity factor compared with solar, since it is generating energy all the time. Unlike East Coast wind turbines that have a fixed foundation, the Pacific floor is too steep for that. On the picture prior slide, on the picture on the right, wait, did I miss it?
Is that the right slide?
Just the next slide. Oh, I'm missing a slide here.
Oh.
That's okay. Well, our wind turbines are much bigger than this one. Ocean wave energy is in a pilot stage. This is a small buoy of the Scripps Pier right here. It's going to be submerged for 6 months, and they're going to check how much energy it generates. So this is a pilot stage. It's not connected to the transmission grid. Next slide. Let's see what's next. Okay, good. Next. next steps. So this is my final slide. Just a sec. Let's stick to this one. Yeah. All right. So this is kind of a picture that gives you all three components here. The three components I described were the technical analysis by UCSD. We discussed that the draft report is out. The final report is going to be completed in early 2022. We expect that report to go to the board in March. At the same time as it goes to the board, there will be a preliminary workforce development study also present to the board. Now I want to kind of go earlier in time to February. The February board meeting is going to be from a presentation from University of San Diego, USD Epic Center. USD Epic Center also happens to be a repository of all CAPs in the region. They also, for SANDAG, have created a GHG inventory, which is one of the most comprehensive in the region. They're going to be working for us to kind of standardize all the CAPs and to create a baseline for all commitments, public and private, as well as agencies, and to identify any gaps between where we should be and where the commitments are. So that is the local policy opportunity analysis. At the time that they present to the board, that'll provide a foundation for us to start working on implementation. Because as I mentioned, a framework with just a report that talks about emissions is not actually reducing emissions until we start implementation. So this is the pathway we are going to take, is to have the implementation work begin as soon as we understand where the gaps are in policy. And the third thing on the list is August. So this August hearing is an actual adoption of the integrated regional decarbonization framework, which has all three things in it: the technical analysis, the implementation pathways, and the workforce development study. With that, I'm here for questions.
And there's several questions. We take those, Tim?
There you go. Okay, let's start with the first one on the list. Who goes first? Carl, you want to state your question? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Murtaza. I really appreciate that the county's framework is using the decarbonization as a lens. That's critical. Nobody else has done that yet. And it's really helping to change the conversations as far as really serious planning, as opposed to planning for just a few years away and then doubling down once more. So that's the first thing, is I just wanted to let you know that we in the community that are trying to get this work done really appreciate that the county's gone out on a limb and done that. My question is, about embodied carbon. When we're actually talking about true deep decarbonization, one of the things we can't screw up is making somebody in Australia, for example, mining the lithium, or China manufacturing a battery and then shipping it over here, having to take our emissions, and then we hold it up as a shiny EV and say, there, we're at zero emissions. So I'm wondering if, particularly in reading the transportation section, that was very kind of dismissive of Sandag's 5 big moves are not going to get us there, and I agree. But it then sort of punted towards transportation being, maybe we'll have to solve this with EVs. So I'm wondering if we're talking about true deep decarbonization, if we need to also consider the embodied carbon in the products that we're going to use to solve the problem.
Thank you, Carl. I think this is like you mentioned, this is somewhat of a new way of trying to do the analysis, but it has a lot of limitations, and you mentioned one of them. So the way for just to address, for example, the sandbag issue, they found a gap. They don't know how to solve it. I mean, that's probably where the chapter is kind of like, and we're getting comments about it because they don't know how to solve how to solve that gap, which sandbag hasn't been able to solve. So this is a question for regional discussion to say, okay, we have a problem, we will do everything we can to address it, but nonetheless we'll still have a gap. On embodied carbon, this is a quite problem with the limitation of the methodology. It's production-based emissions. It is not embodied carbon. And we just had consultant, this is not part of this list, Arup that I'm working with for county-owned buildings. And they have written this phenomenal report. It's from Arup London, which talks about carbon, embodied carbon in buildings. And it's, I would highly recommend it if you Google it. It's one of the most cutting edge research there. Talks about life cycle of buildings, talks about concrete operations. So not just mining, but all the way, its life cycle, all the way to demolition. What do you do with the debris? Oh, of course, concrete, I missed that. And then operation, because most of the time when we think about decarbonization, we're really thinking of operations. We're not thinking all the way from the material to what is the end of life of that material. So this is a new area, emerging area that should be something that we should look at. I think the county should do that, and we'll try to do that on its own facilities. At some point, we have to be able to kind of present a model. So that's, I think I'll stop there, as in, it's a good point, not analyzed in the report. And if you want, you can provide that feedback. I don't think the methodology is kind of like adaptable enough to be able to capture that, but at least they can acknowledge that. So thank you.
Okay, Tom, you want to ask your question about the trees?
Yes, you probably don't know the answer to this, but you mentioned at one point about adding trees to make it negative carbon. Do you have an idea of what the scope of that is? How many trees are you talking about? How many acres?
So this is typically convert. So there's a calculator out there. I'll butcher it. It's tree cover. There's just a urban, sorry, I forget the name of the organization that put out this calculator that can convert trees into emissions. That's not what we're using in this analysis. What they're using is converting different types of vegetation into their effect on not just the environment in terms of emissions, but also an urban heat island effect. So it's an interesting, I'd suggest it's a very comprehensive appendix of different types of trees, and it depends on what kind of vegetation it is, has different impacts.
Okay.
Joy, you want to ask?
Yes, thank you. When I go to Northgate or I go to the nail salon, what folks there tell me is that their problem is the price of gas. And it's not that they necessarily want to drive an ICE vehicle, but they live in apartment homes that are older, that maybe they're 30 to 50 years old, and they don't have carports. They don't have a way to plug in an EV. And I'm wondering if, and so they're kind of looking at a lot of this stuff as something that the elites are doing, in terms of we're trying to wrap our heads around something that, well, we can go out and buy an EV. And they say, well, so where do you plug it in at night? At home? And yeah, that's what we do. We plug our car in at home. but everybody doesn't have a way to plug in their car at home. So is anybody thinking about this?
So Joy, this is a great equity question. I mean, it is like something that's befuddling a lot of policy work that is done because we leave communities behind, and especially those that cannot afford to transition if we do not have a systematic approach to investment. So with that investment, I want to draw attention to the state and federal resources, just the infrastructure bill that are $550 billion of new spending. When this money comes, we got to be intentional about, first of all, drawing that money to our region and then directing it to those that are most vulnerable and that need it the most. So we got to be both smart as well as responsive to our local needs. So this is the beginning of that conversation. With the draft, we hope that when we present the policy options from the local policy opportunity analysis, we can actually do that gap and to be able to quantify it and show to policymakers how we can fill that gap. But it's not just for the purpose of penalizing poor policy or policy that didn't really had an unintended consequence, but it's also for the intention of drawing state and federal dollars so that we can fill that gap.
Yeah, it'd be nice if some apartment complex buildings had some incentive for putting in some charging stations for all of their cars. Leading to the next question, I have a neighbor who's really against the EV, the electric cars, and we're getting in these conversations all the time. So that leads to Cynthia's question about the lithium battery recycling. So Cynthia?
There is a considerable amount of funding in the federal infrastructure bill to study lithium recycling. And I don't have the numbers on the top, but this is problem that is trying to, that is being addressed at a federal level, because it's just at this point, there is no end of life plan for many of these lithium batteries.
So you can't recycle them?
It appears like is economically inefficient in the sense that probably the environmental damage of actually retiring is pretty significant. This problem is only going to grow as the reliance on lithium for electric vehicles and everything else, energy storage, grows. So there has to be a plan. It is still in a research stage.
We thought, just to tag off of that, we thought that Tesla was already recycling their batteries.
Yeah.
And they have lithium batteries. But
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of these commitments by companies are somewhat shaping the market, but then you just have Tesla. I mean, so you have to think.
yeah,
So
about all the other ones.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully they'll follow suit. So my question was on how did UCSD get involved? Seems like they're doing a lot of the technical analysis of the study.
Yeah. So first of all, the direction was before I joined the county. It came in March. I joined in May, June. So it predated my coming on board. But the context here is UC San Diego Global Policy School is, as part of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, helps cities and regions get adopt UN Sustainable Development Goals. So this is like across the globe, it is considered one of the key academic institutions that helps local governments do this kind of work. It is only coordinator in some ways. I wouldn't say only. It is, its primary role is a coordinator of the research. It is because of the nature of the number of experts involved, it plays the role of the lead that brings them all together. In a lot of the way, in many ways, the research, if you look at the list of authors, they're very much diverse, scattered around the country. And UC San Diego authors maybe a few chapters. It's not a majority of them. So they've served as a coordinating role.
Did the county go reach out to the university, or did the university reach out to the county? Do you know?
This was a direction from the Board of Supervisors, and
Okay.
it included University of San Diego as well as UC San Diego.
Okay.
Okay, the last question is more of a couple of questions.
Actually,
Harriet, yeah.
if I can just say for a second, following up to Joy's questions about being able to plug in older buildings, there's a company called Aptera, which makes cars, and they're the most freaky looking weird things because they're shaped like airplane wings. They're round on the front and pointed on the back to minimize the air friction. And they've only got 3 wheels because that each wheel has friction to the ground. So by reducing one wheel, they reduce the friction that is required to move the vehicle. It's a whole bunch of really cool new technologies, and they're not actually making them until the start of next year. But basically they have solar panels on top. And because they are so efficient, they're a 2-seater car right now. They're planning other models, but and I'm not getting a sales kickback on this. I want one in the worst kind of way. Basically, the thing is that if you park this thing in the sun, then it recharges enough during the day to run for about 40 miles, which is about as much as most people use per day. And of course, we here have plenty of sun. Now, the people who have carports and garages, they're going to be out of luck. If you live in a building where the cars all park underneath, where it's shaded and protected from the sun, then you're not going to be able to do this. But I love the idea of a car that you buy once and then you never put gas in it. Basically, you just park it in the sun and it just recharges itself. And the base model is $25,000. So it's not, it's not a Tesla quality buy, Tesla kind of buy where, you have to mortgage the house or take your grandkids' university fund or whatever, things like that. So it's just I think that there are going to be more developments like that because really, I mean, it's just such a wonderful idea that you could buy a car and never put gas in it. Unless you want to go a long distance, and then you could just go to the library and plug in, or some public plug-in place, like maybe 2 or 3 times a year, you'd have to make some shift to park somewhere better. So anyways, I just thought that was a cool kind of solution, because honestly, trying to put electric chargers at every old apartment building, I live near some high density buildings, and oh man, I mean, it would just be really, really hard. So that's just my comment.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds cool. Carl, Carl started talking about recycling of lithium. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I just want to let folks know I was very skeptical about the recycling of lithium batteries. Tesla definitely was not being truthful about the level of recycling they were doing early on. They just sort of, told everyone, don't worry, we will recycle these things. And the truth is the automotive industry really had no strong plans for how exactly they were going to do it. The first thing they started to do was to repurpose them as utility grade storage afterwards. And there's some good prospect in that. So second life for batteries. But more recently in the European Union, they've required their auto manufacturers who are building lithium batteries to have a process, an industrial process to recycle them. And so that went from, we may have been just getting the cobalt from the smelting of batteries before. It was the only thing that we could capture. But they're now using a different set of processes. It's called hydrometallurgical. And so they use acid baths. They churn the whole battery up into little black dust. And then that's still a composition of a lot of different elements. So then they use acid baths to separate those things out. So there's some losses. It's not 100%, but they're close to between 90 and 95%. And what those companies say is it depends on how much you're willing to pay us to get down to those last percentages. And so that's where it should be, I think, our responsibility to make sure that the EV owners, the EV manufacturers are helping to pay for that maybe up front as part of their, sort of like you pay your deposit on an aluminum can when you buy that can of Coke. We should probably be including that as part of the responsibility of recycling those things. But the good news is too that since they are so recyclable in those respects, they'll be able to make good use of that material in the future. The bad news is we need 1 billion cars, folks. That's how many cars we have. And so if we're planning on replacing every ICE car with an electric car, there's no way that you can just keep recycling the electric vehicles that you create to create all the new ones. It doesn't really scale out that way. So it's nice that we have a plan for that these things won't end up in a landfill, but it's not really a reasonable plan for how we're going to create that giant army of EVs. And so Sierra Club's actually been pushing for electrified rail as a better solution to connect the county.
Interesting.
Leslie had some comments to me. Oh, I see John Eldon. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Just if you could ask Leslie to make her comments also.
Am I on?
Yes.
Oh, you were talking about the EV chargers in high density housing, and I believe within the county in various places, there's a pipe dream that there's going to be 10% EV charging in every one of these condo housing units. So there would be basically, if you have 100 people in your association, there would be 10 chargers. So, to cover 10%. And if everybody's driving, an electric car and needs to charge, they'd have to, set up some kind of a reasonable schedule. I myself, I have a charger in my garage, and I plug in about maybe once every 10 days to charge. I drive about 50 miles a week. And as far as recycling goes, I used to be invested in a company called Micrometals that did lead acid battery recycling at a factory in Nevada. And I'm no longer vested in that because it wasn't doing that well.
Thanks, Leslie.
I think that's all the questions. The rest are some more comments about the Aptera car.
John Eldon had a
A
comment.
lot of interest in the Aptera. What kind of car do you drive?
I drive a Prius.
Yeah.
Nice.
All the Prius owners raise their hands.
Yeah,
Former.
yeah, we own 2 of them.
Since 2002.
2002?
I got the first Prius. I mean, the
Wow.
first model they sold in the US, not the,
Oh, I didn't know that.
it was still manufactured in Japan, but it was the first one that was sold here. Yeah.
Wow, you should have, if you held on to that, that'd be worth a mint.
Got
Like-
totaled right after she paid it off. It got totaled.
Oh, no. Oh, that hurts.
Was Tom driving?
Me?
No, I wasn't there.
Oh,
I came and rescued her.
we've had like
And
6
my
or
gas
7
guzzler.
now.
I don't see any more questions. Anybody have any more questions? They can pop in.
John Eldon had a comment.
Well, it's just, it's just a comment that this rush to replace everything from gas appliances to cars or anything else, somebody else already brought up the total life cycle impact of everything has to be considered, including mining, manufacturing, disposal at the other end. And sometimes it's an illusion. For example, I drive 1,000 miles a year total. Doesn't make sense for me to replace a perfectly good gasoline combustion car with electric because you look at the total cost of the materials and everything making the car, and it's better just keep driving mine.
That's a good point, John. That's part of the feasibility analysis of how we get there in terms of the implementation pathways. When we move into that kind of an analysis, it's worth considering, because I think that the UC San Diego leaves it off at these so-called like low regret policies. I think by that they're implying that what they call stranded assets are those that you already bought and you're going to use it until it kind of is not usable anymore. Therefore, the low-hanging fruit would be to then let that stranded asset expire, and then at the time that you replace it, then especially given that some of these appliances or assets, they do not see more than one replacement during, say, a 2035 or 2045 timeline, then that opportunity at the time of replacement is the lowest hanging fruit to change it at that time. It's also going to be driven a lot by consumer demand, because people will want to do something cleaner, and not just because of the environment, but maybe because the technology is cleaner and better and whatnot. So that might be driven by consumer demand and shareholder value because of profit. At that point, it reaches a tipping point, to the extent it could reach a tipping point where it becomes too costly to own an automotive that you cannot find repair shop for example. So that's how the market is going to start shaking itself out in the next couple of decades.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because we've often talked about how at least now it's in the conversation, where I think even a year ago, it really wasn't even in the conversation, let alone a couple years ago. So good stuff. Well, with that, we are at the, I guess, the bottom of the hour, or at the half hour. We're at our hour time. So Dr. Baksamusa, thank you so much for joining us. It's
Thank you.
once again, I know we're still at the beginning stages of it, but at least it's good to know that the county is looking at this and taking it seriously, and that UCSD is on board too. So really good. We appreciate having you. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're squeezing us in within other meetings, so we certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Yeah.